September 1961. A husband and wife are driving home through the mountains of New Hampshire after a short holiday. The roads are quiet, the night is clear, and apart from a strange light in the sky, nothing seems unusual. Hours later, they arrive home, but something isn't right. Their journey should have ended much earlier. Neither of them can fully explain where the missing time went. Over the following days, small details begin to emerge. Scuffed shoes, damaged clothing, strange memories, and vivid dreams. A growing feeling that something happened on that lonely mountain road, and something neither of them can remember. Welcome to Betty and Barney Hill. To understand why this case has become so famous, we first need to understand who Betty and Barney Hill were. In 1961, Betty and Barney lived a quiet life in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Betty worked as a social worker and Barney worked for the United States Postal Service. They weren't celebrities and they weren't scientists, and they certainly weren't known for making extraordinary claims. In fact, before the events that would make them famous, they were simply a married couple trying to build a life together. But there was another reason the Hills stood out. At a time when racial tensions remained high across America, Betty and Barney Hill were an interracial couple, something that was still uncommon and often met with hostility in many parts of the United States. As a result, they were no strangers to unwanted attention, nor were they the type of people who actively sought it. In September 1961, the couple decided to take a short holiday through Canada, a chance to relax and a time to get away, and eventually a chance to begin the journey home. A journey that should have been completely ordinary. But somewhere on a lonely stretch of the road through the White Mountains of New Hampshire, something happened. Something that neither Betty nor Barney would ever fully be able to explain. On the evening of September 19th, 1961, Betty and Barney began the long drive home from their holiday in Canada. The roads were quiet and the weather was clear, and for most of the journey, nothing seemed unusual. As they travelled south through the White Mountains of New Hampshire, Betty noticed something in the night sky. At first, it appeared to be little more than a bright point of light, perhaps a star, or even a planet. But as the miles passed, the light seemed to move, and more importantly, it seemed to be moving with them. At first, neither of them paid much attention to it. Strange lights in the sky weren't exactly unheard of, and after a long journey, both were eager to get home. But the further they drove, the stranger the object appeared to become. It didn't behave like a star, and it didn't move like an aircraft, and it certainly didn't appear to be standing still. According to Betty, the light seemed to change direction, sometimes moving ahead of them, sometimes appearing to drift across the sky, always remaining just noticeable enough to keep drawing their attention. Eventually, curiosity got the better of them. The couple pulled over and stepped out of the car. Standing in the darkness, they watched the object through binoculars, and what Barney saw next would stay with him for the rest of his life. Because whatever this thing was, it no longer looked like a distant light. It looked like something much closer. As the object appeared to draw closer, Barney made the decision to get a better look. The night was quiet. Apart from the distant sounds of the forest, there was nothing unusual. Raising his binoculars, Barney focused on the object ahead. What he saw would later become one of the most debated parts of the entire case. Now, according to Barney, the object no longer resembled a bright light. Instead, it appeared to be a structured craft. Large, silent, and moving in a way he couldn't explain. As he watched, the object seemed to descend, growing larger, closer, more detailed. Then Barney noticed something else. Figures. Dark shapes visible through what appeared to be windows, looking and watching him. Years later, Barney would describe the overwhelming feeling that came over him in that moment. It wasn't curiosity, nor was it wonder, but it was fear. Convinced that whatever he was looking at was not a conventional aircraft, Barney rushed back towards the car. He urged Betty to leave immediately, and without fully understanding why, the couple drove away into the darkness. But the night was far from over, because the next thing either of them clearly remembered was arriving at home. The drive home should have taken only a short while, yet when Betty and Barney finally arrived back at their house in Portsmouth, something felt wrong. Neither of them could immediately explain why. The journey itself was largely a blur, but both were left with the uncomfortable feeling that more time had passed than they could account for. At first, they tried to put the experience behind them. After all, they'd been travelling for hours. Perhaps they were simply tired, or perhaps their minds had begun to play tricks on them. But over the following days, small details began to emerge. Details that neither of them could easily explain. Barney noticed that his shoes were unusually scuffed and worn, almost as if he'd walked much further than he remembered. Betty discovered strange marks on her dress, marks she could not account for, and both recall hearing a series of unusual buzzing sounds shortly after driving away from the object. The sounds themselves were strange enough, but what disturbed them most was what came after. Neither could clearly remember what had happened between hearing those sounds and arriving home. The more they thought about it, the larger the gap seemed to become. Not a few missing minutes, potentially hours. Somewhere between the sighting in the White Mountains and their arrival back in Portsmouth, a portion of the night appeared to be missing. A stretch of time neither Betty nor Barney could clearly explain. And no matter how many times they replayed the journeys in their mind, the answers never came. For many people, that might have been the end of the story. A strange sighting, an unsettling memory, a mystery left unsolved. But for Betty and Barney, the questions were only just beginning. In the weeks that followed, Betty found herself thinking constantly about the events of that night. The strange object, the missing memories, the feeling that something important had happened. And then the dreams began. They'd become more vivid and detailed, unlike anything she'd experienced before. Night after night, Betty dreamed that she and Barney had been stopped on the roadside, that they'd been escorted aboard a strange craft, and that they had encountered beings unlike any she had ever seen. The dreams were so vivid that she began writing them down, page after page, trying to capture every detail before it faded from memory. At first, Betty viewed the dreams as exactly that. They were dreams, nothing more. But as time passed, she began to wonder if they represented something else entirely. Something connected to the missing hours neither she nor Barney could explain. Now Barney, however, was experiencing the events a little bit differently. Rather than dreams, he'd begun suffering from periods of stress and anxiety. The experience weighed heavily on him, and the unanswered questions refused to go away. Eventually, the couple sought professional help. They came into contact with psychiatrist Benjamin Simon, a respected physician with experience in treating trauma. Over a series of hypnosis sessions, Simon had attempted to help the couple recover details from the missing period of time. What emerged would become one of the most famous and controversial accounts in UFO history. Under hypnosis, both Betty and Barney described being taken aboard a craft, examined by strange beings, questioned, observed, and then eventually returned to their car. For believers, the session appeared to reveal the truth behind the missing hours. For skeptics, they raised an entirely different possibility, that the memories themselves had been created, influenced by the hypnosis process itself. More than 60 years later, that debate continues, because no one can say for certain which explanation is correct. So, what really happened to Betty and Barney Hill? For believers, the case represents one of the strongest alien abduction accounts ever recorded. Two ordinary people, a strange object, missing time, independent hypnosis sessions, and remarkably similar descriptions of events. To them, the simplest explanation is that Betty and Barney experienced exactly what they claimed: an encounter with something not of this world. Now, what do the skeptics think? They point out that Betty's vivid dreams began before the hypnosis session, that memory is far from perfect, and that hypnosis itself can sometimes create false memories rather than recover genuine ones. Others suggest the original sighting might have been a combination of fatigue, stress, misidentified celestial objects, and the natural tendency of the human mind to fill gaps in memory. Even Benjamin Simon, the psychiatrist who conducted the hypnosis sessions, did not conclude that the Hills had been abducted by extraterrestrials. Instead, he believed the experience may have originated from psychological factors rather than literal encounters. And yet, for all the theories that have been proposed over the decades, none have completely answered every question. Why were both Betty and Barney so deeply affected by the experience? Why did the missing time continue to trouble them? And why has their story remained one of the most discussed UFO cases in history? Perhaps the most interesting part of the Betty and Barney Hill case isn't the strange object, or the missing time, or even the hypnosis session. It's the fact that two ordinary people experienced something that stayed with them for the rest of their lives, something they never fully understood. Memory is a strange thing. We rely on it every day, and we trust it to tell us where we've been, what we've seen, and what we've experienced. Yet memory isn't perfect. It can fade, and it can change. And sometimes, the harder we search for answers, the more uncertain those answers become. Whether Betty and Barney encountered something extraordinary, or whether they became trapped inside a mystery of their own minds, is something each of us must decide for ourselves. But one thing is certain, more than 60 years later, we're still asking the same question: what happened on that lonely road in New Hampshire? If you enjoy mystery videos like these, please consider liking, subscribing and ringing the bell, as it really helps the channel to grow. And if you have your own theory about Betty and Barney Hill case, please leave it in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. So until next time, remember, question everything, keep safe, toodles.